Apache chief's daughter sheltered by rancher. What he found outside his cabin was unbelievable. The gunshot cracked through the dawn air before Jake Morrison even had his boots on. He grabbed his rifle and rushed to the window of his cabin, squinting into the purple light spreading across the Arizona territory. 3 riders were bearing down hard from the eastern ridge, their horses kicking up dust clouds that looked like smoke signals. Behind them, at least a dozen more horsemen followed, and the morning sun glinted off their weapons. Jake didn't waste time wondering. He threw open his door and stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. That's when he saw her. A young woman was running across his property, her dark hair streaming behind her, dressed in buckskin and beadwork that marked her as Apache. She was fast, but the lead riders were gaining ground. Her horse must have gone lame or taken a bullet, because she was on foot and clearly desperate. She saw Jake and changed direction, sprinting straight for his cabin. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment he made his decision. He fired a warning shot over the heads of the pursuing riders, then motioned her inside. She didn't hesitate, darting past him through the doorway. Jake stepped back inside and barred the door, his heart hammering in his chest. The woman pressed herself against the wall, breathing hard, her hand clutching a knife at her belt. She was young, maybe 20, with fierce dark eyes that showed no fear despite her situation. Blood ran down her left arm from a grazing wound. "They will kill you for this," she said in clear English, surprising him. "They'll have to get through this door first," Jake replied, moving to the window. The riders pulled up short about 50 yards from the cabin. They weren't cavalry, and they weren't Apache warriors either. These were white men, rough-looking types, with worn leather and hard faces, the kind of men who made their living in ways that didn't involve honest work. Their leader was a tall man with a scar running down his cheek riding a black stallion. "Morrison," the scarred man called out, "that girl's wanted for murder. You're harboring a criminal." Jake knew Pete Dalton by reputation. The man was a bounty hunter, but he was also known to bend the truth when it suited his wallet. Jake had no reason to trust him and every reason to be suspicious. "I don't see any badge," Jake shouted back. "And I don't see any wanted poster. All I see is a dozen armed men chasing one unarmed woman. Now you can turn around and ride off my property, or we can have a conversation about trespassing." Dalton spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "This ain't your business, rancher. That's Chief Running Bear's daughter. She killed 3 men in cold blood 2 nights ago. There's a price on her head, and we aim to collect it." Jake glanced at the woman. She met his eyes steadily and shook her head once, firm and certain. He'd been in the territory long enough to know when someone was lying, and Dalton's story had more holes than a rotted fence. If there's a price on her head, you can bring the proper authorities," Jake said. "Until then, she's under my protection." The tension outside thickened like storm clouds. Dalton's men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. Jake counted 13 men total, and he was just one man with 1 rifle and a 6-shooter. The odds were terrible, but he'd faced worse during the war. Besides, there was something about the way that woman looked at him, something that told him she was innocent of whatever Dalton was claiming. "You're making a mistake," Dalton warned, his voice dropping low and dangerous. "Won't be my first," Jake answered. The morning sun climbed higher, and the standoff continued. Jake knew this was just the beginning. Whatever he'd stumbled into, there was no backing out now. The woman behind him represented something bigger than a simple bounty, and those men outside wanted her badly enough to risk a fight. He just had to figure out why before the situation exploded into violence. Neither of them might survive. Dalton finally pulled his horse around. "We'll be back, Morrison. And next time, we won't be so polite." The riders retreated, but they didn't go far. Jake could see them setting up camp near the tree line, settling in for a siege. They weren't leaving, and that meant trouble was just getting started. Jake turned from the window to face the woman who'd just turned his quiet ranch into a battleground. Her eyes held gratitude but also wariness, like a wild animal that wasn't sure if it had found sanctuary or just traded one trap for another. "Guess we should get acquainted," Jake said, lowering his rifle. "Name's Jake Morrison, and you just made my life a whole lot more complicated." The woman's expression softened slightly, but the knife never left her hand. "I am called Kiona, and you may have just saved my life, or you may have only delayed my death. Either way, I am grateful." Outside, Dalton's men were building fires and checking their weapons. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jake had just put himself between a rock and a hard place, and the pressure was about to get a whole lot worse. But as he looked at Kiona's determined face and the courage in her eyes, he knew he'd made the right choice. Now he just had to figure out how to keep them both alive long enough to uncover the truth. The situation outside Jake's cabin deteriorated as the day wore on. Dalton's men weren't just camping. They were fortifying positions. Jake watched through the gaps in his shuttered windows as they built rough breastworks from fallen logs and positioned themselves at strategic points around his property. They were preparing for a long siege, and that meant they were serious about getting Kiona, dead or alive. "Tell me the truth," Jake said, not taking his eyes off the men outside. "All of it. If I'm going to die protecting you, I deserve to know why." Kiona moved to the window beside him, careful to stay out of the sightlines. Up close, Jake could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her shoulders sagged despite her straight posture. She'd been running for more than just a few hours. "My father is chief running bear of the Chiricahua Apache," she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "3 days ago, white men came to our camp under a flag of peace. They said they represented a mining company that wanted to negotiate passage through our lands. My father agreed to meet with them, as he always seeks peace over war." Jake loaded his rifle methodically, listening. He'd heard stories of mining companies pushing into Apache territory, offering promises they never intended to keep. "The meeting was a trap," Kiona continued, her jaw tightening. "They brought poisoned whiskey. My father drank only a little, but 3 of our elders drank more. They became violently ill. One of them, Grey Wolf, died within hours. The others are still fighting for their lives." "And the men Dalton says you killed?" Jake asked. "I killed no one," Kiona said firmly, "but I was there when it happened." "After Grey Wolf died, my brother Swift River and 2 of our warriors tracked the white men who brought the whiskey. They found them celebrating in a camp 10 miles from our village. There was a fight. The white men drew their weapons first, but our warriors were faster. All 3 white men died." "But you weren't there for that," Jake said, starting to see where this was heading. "No, but I was there when my brother returned. I was tending to the sick elders. When Dalton and his men arrived at our camp the next morning, they claimed they were looking for murderers. They had papers, documents they said proved we had no right to the land where the fight happened. They said it belonged to the mining company now, and that any Apache found on it were trespassers. They said the 3 men who died were merely defending their property." Jake cursed under his breath. It was an old story, played out across the West with sickening regularity. Men with money and connections redrawing boundaries on maps, declaring that land belonged to them by some legal trick, then sending killers to enforce their claims. "My father refused to hand over Swift River and the others," Kiona went on. "He said the white men brought poison to our people and death to Grey Wolf. He said our warriors acted in defense of their tribe. Dalton threatened war. He said he would return with the army and burn our village unless we surrendered the killers." "So you ran," Jake said. "No. My father sent me away. He knew Dalton was lying about something. The papers he showed were too new, too clean. My father wanted me to ride to Fort Grant and speak with Colonel Hayes, who's always been fair with our people. He wanted me to tell the colonel what really happened before Dalton could spread his lies. But Dalton caught up with you. They were waiting on the trail. Someone must have told them which route I would take. My horse was shot from under me 5 miles from here. I ran, and I kept running until I saw your cabin." Jake processed this information, his mind working through the implications. If Kiona was telling the truth and his gut said she was, then this was bigger than just a bounty. This was about land, about money, and about powerful men trying to remove the Apache from territory they wanted to exploit. "Dalton said you killed 3 men," Jake noted. "But you just told me your brother and his warriors did that. Why would he lie and say it was you?" Kiona's expression darkened. "Because I am Chief Running Bear's daughter. If they kill or capture me, they shame my father. They show that he cannot even protect his own child. They weaken him in the eyes of our people and in the eyes of the army officers who might otherwise support his claims. It is not about justice. It is about breaking my father's spirit and his power." A rifle shot cracked from outside, and the window frame beside Jake's head exploded in splinters. Both of them dropped to the floor as more shots followed, punching through the wooden walls of the cabin. Jake crawled to a different window and returned fire, aiming carefully at the muzzle flashes he could see from Dalton's position. "They're testing our defenses," Jake said, reloading quickly. "Seeing how we respond, where we're positioned. This is just the opening move." "You could still give me up," Kiona said, her voice level. "Tell them I forced my way inside. They would let you live." Jake fired again, and one of Dalton's men yelped and fell back behind cover. "That ship sailed the moment I let you through my door. Besides, I fought for the Union because I believed everyone deserved freedom and justice. Didn't see much sense in that fight ending just because the war did." Kiona studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. The wariness didn't disappear entirely, but it lessened. "You are not like most white men I have met." "I'll take that as a compliment," Jake said with a grim smile. "Now, we need to figure out how to get word to Fort Grant. If Colonel Hayes knows what's happening here, he might be able to stop this before it turns into a massacre." "The fort is 20 miles east," Kiana said. "Even if we could get past Dalton's men, they would run us down before we made it halfway." Jake thought hard, his mind racing through possibilities. His nearest neighbor was the Patterson Ranch, about 8 miles south, but that meant crossing open ground that Dalton's men could easily cover. The town of Copper Creek was 15 miles north, but the trail there ran through narrow canyons where an ambush would be child's play. Then he remembered. "There's an old Apache trail that runs through the ravine behind my property. It's narrow and rough, hard for horses, but a person on foot could use it to get past Dalton's men without being seen. It eventually connects to the main road about 5 miles from here." "You know Apache trails?" Kiona asked, surprised. "I spent time with your people during the war. Some Apache scouts helped the army track Confederate raiders. They taught me things, showed me places. I tried to return the favor by treating them with respect." Another volley of shots peppered the cabin, and Jake returned fire. He was conserving ammunition, but he couldn't let Dalton's men get too comfortable. They needed to know that getting to the cabin would cost them blood. "One of us needs to make that run," Kiona said. "Get to the fort, bring back help. But who stays and who goes?" It was a fair question, and Jake knew the answer immediately, even though he didn't like it. "You go. You're faster, you know the land better, and Colonel Hayes will believe you more quickly than he'd believe a rancher he's never met. I stay here and hold them off as long as I can." "They will kill you," Kiona said bluntly. "The moment I am gone, they will attack in force." "You cannot hold this cabin alone against 13 men." "Maybe not," Jake admitted, "but I can slow them down. I can make them pay for every inch. And maybe I can convince them that you're still here, buy you enough time to reach the fort and bring back help." Kiona shook her head. "There must be another way." "If there is, I haven't thought of it yet. And we're running out of time." Dalton's getting bolder. "That last volley came from closer positions." "He's moving his men up, tightening the noose. If we wait too long, that ravine trail won't be an option anymore." The sun was past its zenith now, the afternoon heat building. Inside the cabin, the air was thick and stifling. Jake's shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands were steady but tired from gripping his rifle. He'd been in combat before, but this was different. This was his home, his land, and he was defending it against men who had no right to be here. "There might be a way to improve the odds," Kiona said slowly. "If we wait until dark, I can slip out through the ravine unseen. But before I go, we prepare the cabin. Make it look like we are both still here, both still fighting. Set up false positions, leave signs of movement. Dalton's men will be watching for 2 defenders. If we can fool them into thinking we are both still here, even for a few hours, it gives me more time to reach the fort." Jake considered this. It was risky, but it was better than nothing. "What do you need?" "Blankets, clothing, anything we can use to create shapes that look like people from a distance. And we need to prepare your escape route as well. You cannot stay here until the army arrives. Once they realize I am gone, they will attack in full force. You need a way out." "I'm not running for my own home," Jake said stubbornly. "You are not running," Kiona corrected him. "You are surviving. There is no honor in dying for pride. My people learned this lesson the hard way, many times. Sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is live to fight another day." Jake wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. This wasn't about pride or honor. This was about staying alive long enough to see justice done. "All right, we prepare for tonight. But I'm not leaving until I'm sure you've got a good head start." They spent the afternoon preparing, working quickly and efficiently between exchanges of gunfire with Dalton's men. They set up dummy positions using rolled blankets and spare clothes, propping them near windows where they could be seen from outside. Jake showed Kiona where he kept his spare ammunition and supplies, making sure she could carry enough food and water to reach the fort. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Dalton called out again, "Morrison, you've had all day to think about this. Send the girl out and we'll let you live. Keep her in there, and you'll both die. It's that simple." Jake moved to the window and shouted back, "You've had all day to ride away and stop making a fool of yourself. The offer still stands." Dalton's laughter was cold and humorless. "Have it your way, rancher. When the sun comes up tomorrow, we're coming in. And we won't be asking nicely anymore." The threat hung in the air as darkness fell. Jake and Kiona sat in the growing shadows of the cabin, the only light coming from the moon through the gaps in the shutters. Outside, Dalton's campfires flickered like distant stars, a ring of threats surrounding the cabin. "It is time," Kiona said quietly. "The moon is bright enough to see, but the shadows are deep enough to hide." Jake handed her a canteen and a small pack of food. The ravine trail starts about 30 yards behind the cabin, hidden by that stand of juniper trees. Follow it north for about 2 miles, then it curves east. Stay in the ravine until you reach the old mission ruins. From there, you can see the main road. Wait until dawn if you have to, make sure it's clear, then make a run for the fort. Kiona took the supplies and then, surprising Jake, placed her hand on his shoulder. "You are a good man, Jake Morrison. I will not forget what you have done for me. When I return with the soldiers, I will make sure they know you risked everything to help someone you did not even know." "Just get there safe," Jake said. "And tell Colonel Hayes the whole truth. Every detail. These mining company men are playing a dangerous game, and it needs to stop before more people die." Kiona nodded and moved to the back door. Jake positioned himself at the front window, ready to create a distraction if needed. He fired several shots at Dalton's positions, spacing them out to make it seem like he and Kiona were both still actively defending the cabin. While the attention was focused on the front, Kiona slipped out the back door and disappeared into the night like smoke. Jake kept up the charade, moving between windows, firing from different positions, sometimes calling out to empty air as if he were talking to Kiona. He even fired her rifle a few times, making it seem like 2 people were still in the cabin. The dummy positions helped, their dark shapes visible through the windows, looking enough like people in the dim light to sell the illusion. Hours passed. Jake's arms ached from holding the rifle, and his throat was dry from the smoke of gunpowder. He allowed himself small sips from his remaining canteen, knowing he needed to conserve water. Dalton's men fired sporadically through the night, keeping up the pressure but not wasting ammunition on a full assault. They were waiting for dawn, just as Dalton had promised. Jake used the quiet moments to prepare his own escape. He gathered supplies into a small pack, made sure his pistol was fully loaded, and memorized the route he would take when the time came. There was an old mine shaft about 3 miles west, abandoned years ago but still accessible. He could hole up there if he needed to, wait for the army to arrive, then come back and rebuild. But as the first gray light of dawn began to creep across the horizon, Jake realized something had changed. Dalton's men were moving, shifting positions, and their movements were purposeful and coordinated. They were preparing for the final assault. Jake took a deep breath and settled in behind his best defensive position. He'd bought Kiona several hours of head start. Now he just had to survive long enough for that head start to matter. The sun rose slowly, and with it came the moment of truth. Dalton's voice rang out one final time. "This is your last chance, Morrison. Come out now, or we're coming in." Jake's answer was a single rifle shot that knocked the hat off Dalton's head. The bounty hunter dove for cover, and the morning erupted in gunfire. The siege was over. The battle had begun. The assault came hard and fast, just as Jake had expected. Dalton's men poured fire into the cabin from 3 sides, their bullets tearing through the wooden walls like paper. Jake stayed low, moving constantly, returning fire when he had clear targets, conserving ammunition when he didn't. The dummy positions took several direct hits, and Jake heard Dalton cursing when he realized he'd been wasting bullets on rolled blankets. "The girl's gone," one of Dalton's men shouted. "She ain't in there." "Then Morrison dies for nothing," Dalton snarled back. "Burn him out." Jake's heart sank as he saw 2 men running toward the cabin carrying torches. He took careful aim and dropped the first one with a shot to the leg, but the second man made it close enough to hurl his torch onto the cabin's roof. The dry wooden shingles caught immediately, and within moments smoke was pouring through the ceiling. Jake knew he had minutes at best before the cabin became an inferno. He grabbed his pack, smashed out a back window, and rolled through it just as the roof began to collapse. Bullets kicked up dirt around him as he sprinted for the tree line, zigzagging to make himself a harder target. Something hot sliced across his ribs, and he knew he'd been hit, but adrenaline kept him moving. He made it to the cover of the trees and kept running, heading west toward the old mine. Behind him he could hear Dalton's men shouting, organizing a pursuit. But Jake knew these hills better than they did, and he used every trick he'd learned during the war to throw them off his trail. He doubled back, walked through streams to hide his scent, and used rocky ground where his boots left no prints. By midday, he'd lost the immediate pursuit and made it to the mine shaft. The wound in his side was bleeding but not critical, a deep graze that would hurt like hell but wouldn't kill him if he kept it clean. He tore strips from his shirt and bound it tight, then settled into the darkness of the mine to wait. The hours crawled by. Jake's mind wandered to Kiona, wondering if she'd made it to the fort, if Colonel Hayes had believed her story, if help was coming. He thought about his burned cabin, years of work and memories reduced to ashes. He thought about the choice he'd made, sheltering a stranger and making enemies of dangerous men, and he realized he'd make the same choice again without hesitation. As the sun began to set on his second day in the mine, Jake heard horses approaching. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, his pistol ready, prepared to make a last stand if Dalton had finally tracked him down. But then he heard a voice he didn't expect. "Jake Morrison, this is Colonel Hayes of Fort Grant. Miss Keona says you're wounded and in need of assistance. Show yourself, and you have my word no harm will come to you." Jake emerged cautiously from the mine, and his legs nearly gave out in relief when he saw not Dalton's ragged bounty hunters, but a proper army patrol with the colonel himself at its head, and there, sitting on a horse beside the colonel, was Keona, looking tired but alive and triumphant. "You made it," Jake said, his voice rough. "I told you I would bring help," Keona replied with a slight smile. "Though I am sorry it took so long. The colonel needed to see proof of what I claimed." Colonel Hayes dismounted and approached Jake, his weathered face serious but kind. "Miss Keona told me everything, including your role in protecting her. She also told me about your cabin. I'm sorry we didn't arrive in time to save it." "It's just wood and nails," Jake said, though the loss still stung. "What matters is that the truth comes out." "What about Dalton and his men?" The colonel's expression hardened. "We encountered them on our way here. They tried to claim they were pursuing the dangerous criminal, but when I informed them that Miss Keona had already reached the fort and given her statement, their story changed 3 times in as many minutes. I've placed them all under arrest pending investigation, and I've sent word to the territorial governor about the mining company's activities." "Will it make a difference?" Jake asked. "It will," Colonel Hayes assured him. "The governor's been looking for evidence of fraud and intimidation by mining interests. What's happened here, combined with the poisoning of Chief Running Bear's people, is exactly the kind of proof he needs to take action. There will be a full inquiry, and if the evidence supports what Miss Keona has told me, there will be consequences for everyone involved, not just Dalton and his men." Jake felt the tension he'd been carrying for 2 days finally begin to ease. "And Chief Running Bear, his people? I've already dispatched a medical officer to their camp," the colonel said. "The 2 elders who survived the poisoning are receiving treatment, and I've posted guards to ensure no further harassment from the mining company or anyone else. Chief Running Bear sends his profound gratitude for what you did to protect his daughter." Keona dismounted and walked over to Jake. She looked him in the eye and spoke in a voice that carried quiet dignity. "My father wishes to speak with you. He wants to thank you properly, in person. He also wishes to make you a friend of our people. It is a great honor, one not given lightly." "I'd be honored," Jake said sincerely. "But first I need to clean up this wound and maybe sleep for about a week." Colonel Hayes assigned 2 soldiers to escort Jake back to Fort Grant, where the post surgeon could properly treat his injury. As they rode, Keona stayed close beside him, and they talked quietly about what would happen next. "What will you do now?" Keona asked. "Your home is gone. You have made enemies of powerful men." "I'll rebuild," Jake said simply. "That land is mine, legal and paid for. No mining company is going to run me off it. It might take time, might take work, but I'll build something new. Something better." "You will not be alone," Keona said. "My father will send men to help with the rebuilding. It is our way to repay debts of honor, and I think you will find that having friends among the Apache is a valuable thing in this territory." "I think you're right about that," Jake agreed. They reached Fort Grant as the sun was setting, painting the adobe walls in shades of gold and amber. The fort's surgeon, a gruff but skilled man named Dr. Patterson, cleaned and stitched Jake's wound while lecturing him about the foolishness of taking on 13 armed men alone. "Brave, I'll give you that," Dr. Patterson said as he tied off the final stitch. "Stupid, but brave. You're lucky this didn't hit anything vital. Another inch to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation." Over the next several days, as Jake recovered and regained his strength, the full scope of the mining company's crimes began to unravel. Colonel Hayes' investigation revealed that the company had been systematically falsifying land claims, bribing local officials, and using men like Dalton to intimidate or eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Chief Running Bear's people were just the latest in a long line of victims. The territorial governor, armed with this evidence, ordered the company's operation shut down and its leaders arrested. Several prominent businessmen who'd been backing the company suddenly found themselves facing criminal charges. The scandal rocked the territory and sent a clear message that the days of unchecked exploitation were coming to an end, at least for the moment. Jake spent a week at the fort, healing and giving his official statement to the authorities. Keona visited him every day, bringing food her people had prepared, and news of what was happening. She told him that Chief Running Bear had sent warriors to watch over his land, ensuring that neither the mining company nor Dalton's former associates tried to stake a claim to it. "My father says your bravery has earned you a place of honor among our people," Kiona told him. "When you are ready to rebuild, we will help. It is our way." On the 8th day, when Dr. Patterson finally cleared Jake to leave, Colonel Hayes arranged for an escort to take him to Chief Running Bear's camp. It was the first time Jake had visited an Apache village since the war, and he was struck by the careful balance of tradition and adaptation he saw there. The people lived in wickiups and traditional dwellings, but he also saw modern tools and evidence of trade with the outside world. Chief Running Bear himself was an imposing figure, tall and dignified despite being in his 60s. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. When Jake was brought before him, the chief studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You risked your life for my daughter without knowing her, without knowing if her cause was just simply because you saw someone in need," Chief Running Bear said through an interpreter, though Jake suspected the chief understood English perfectly well. "This speaks to the content of your spirit. You are a man of honor, Jake Morrison, and honor is a quality my people value above all others." The chief then performed a ceremony that Jake didn't fully understand, but recognized as deeply significant. He was given gifts including a beautifully crafted knife and a blanket woven with traditional Apache symbols. Chief Running Bear also declared that Jake would always be welcome in Apache camps, that he would be considered a friend and protector of the people. "There is more," Kiona said, stepping forward. She had been standing with the other women, but now moved to stand beside her father. My father has decided that I will oversee the rebuilding of your cabin. It will be my responsibility to ensure that the work is done properly and that you are repaid in full for the sacrifice you made." Jake started to protest that this wasn't necessary, but Chief Running Bear held up his hand. "It is decided. Honor demands it. You gave everything to protect my daughter. We will give you back what you lost, and more." Over the following months, Jake witnessed something he'd never expected to see. Apache warriors and craftsmen arrived at his burned property and began to rebuild. But they didn't just recreate what had been there before. They built something better, incorporating traditional Apache techniques with modern construction. The new cabin was larger, stronger, with better defensive positions, but also more comfortable living spaces. Kiona was there almost every day, supervising the work and often working alongside the men. Jake found himself looking forward to her visits, to the conversations they had about everything from building techniques to the changing political landscape of the territory. She was intelligent, fierce, and uncompromising in her principles, and he admired her tremendously. "You could have gone back to your people," Jake said to her one afternoon, as they watched the sun set over the nearly completed cabin. "You've done more than enough to repay any debt. Perhaps I stay because I choose to, not because of debt," Kiona replied, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "You are an interesting man, Jake Morrison. You do not see the world the way most white men do. You see people as people, not as obstacles or resources to be used. It is refreshing." "I had good teachers," Jake said. "The Apache scouts I worked with during the war taught me a lot about seeing the world differently." As autumn turned to winter, the cabin was completed, better than it had ever been. But more than that, something had developed between Jake and Kiona that neither of them had anticipated. It started as mutual respect, grew into deep friendship, and gradually became something more. "My father sees it," Kiona told Jake one evening as they sat by the fire in his new cabin. "He says you look at me the way my mother looked at him when they were young. He asked me if I return your feelings." Jake's heart hammered in his chest. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that you are a good man, a brave man, and that I have come to care for you deeply. I also told him that I do not know if our peoples can accept such a union. The divide between Apache and white is wide and deep. Your father crossed that divide to help me," Jake pointed out, "and I've seen Apache and whites working together these past months, building something good. Maybe the divide isn't as wide as we think. Maybe it just takes people willing to build bridges instead of walls." Kiona studied him in the firelight, her dark eyes thoughtful. "You would face prejudice from both sides. White men would call you a traitor to your race. Some of my people would say I am betraying our traditions. It would not be an easy path." "Nothing worth having ever is," Jake said. He reached out and took her hand, and she didn't pull away. "I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm not saying it wouldn't be hard, but I know that what I feel for you is real, and I think you feel the same way. It seems to me that's worth fighting for, worth working through the difficulties." Kiona was quiet for a long time, her hand warm in his. Finally, she spoke. "My father told me something after you left the village. He said that honor and love are the two forces that can change the world, but only if people are brave enough to embrace them. He said you had shown honor by protecting me. Now the question is whether we are both brave enough for the other part. I'm willing to try if you are, Jake said. Kiona squeezed his hand and smiled, a full genuine smile that lit up her entire face. Then we will try together. We will show both our peoples that the divide can be crossed, that understanding and respect can overcome prejudice and fear. It will not be easy, but as you said, nothing worth having ever is. The winter passed with Jake and Kiona spending increasing amounts of time together, learning each other's ways and building something neither of them had expected to find. Chief Running Bear gave his blessing, which helped ease some of the concerns among the Apache. The reception from white settlers was more mixed, ranging from acceptance to outright hostility, but Jake and Kiona faced it together. Colonel Hayes proved to be an unexpected ally. He'd seen too much senseless conflict and was glad to see an example of cooperation and understanding between peoples. He made sure that Jake and Kiona had the protection of the army when needed, and he spoke publicly about the importance of building bridges between communities. By the time spring arrived, bringing new life to the land, Jake and Kiona had made their decision. They would marry, combining traditions from both cultures in a ceremony that honored both heritages. It would be a statement, a declaration that love and respect could overcome the divisions that had caused so much suffering. The wedding took place on Jake's land, with Chief Running Bear presiding over the Apache portions of the ceremony, and a minister from Copper Creek handling the Christian elements. It was attended by Apache warriors and white settlers, by army officers and ranch hands, by people who'd never imagined they'd be celebrating together. As Jake and Kiona exchanged their vows, looking into each other's eyes with absolute certainty, something shifted in the territory. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was real. People saw that the divide between cultures could be crossed, that understanding and respect could replace fear and hatred. The years that followed weren't always easy. There were still those who couldn't accept what Jake and Kiona represented, still incidents of prejudice and resistance. But they persevered, building their life together and serving as an example of what was possible when people chose courage over fear, love over hate. Chief Running Bear remained a frequent visitor, proud of his daughter, and grateful for the son-in-law who'd proven himself worthy of her. The Apache and the settlers in the region developed a cautious but growing cooperation, learning to coexist and even help each other during difficult times. Jake never forgot that morning when Kiona came running across his property, chased by Dalton's men. It had been the moment that changed everything, the moment when he'd had to choose between safety and honor. He'd chosen honor, and that choice had led him to a life richer and more meaningful than anything he could have imagined. As he stood on his porch years later, watching the sunset with Kiona beside him and their children playing in the yard, mixing Apache and English in their speech as naturally as breathing, Jake reflected on how much had changed. The territory was still wild, still dangerous, still full of conflicts and challenges, but it was also a place where miracles could happen, where courage and compassion could build bridges across the deepest divides. The cabin that had been burned to the ground by hatred had been rebuilt by cooperation. The woman who'd come to him as a desperate fugitive had become his wife, his partner, his anchor, and the land that had been soaked in conflict was now home to a new generation that didn't see the world in terms of us versus them, but simply as people sharing a difficult but beautiful land. Jake knew that not everyone would follow their example, that prejudice and hatred would continue to poison the lives of many, but he also knew that every bridge built, every wall torn down, every act of courage and compassion mattered. You couldn't change the whole world, but you could change your corner of it. And if enough people did that, if enough people chose honor over hatred, maybe the whole world would eventually change too. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Kiona leaned against him, and Jake wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They didn't need to speak. They both understood what they'd built together, what they represented, and what they'd overcome. The story that had started with gunshots and desperation had become one of hope and possibility. And as night fell over the Arizona territory, with stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, Jake Morrison knew that sheltering the Apache chief's daughter outside his cabin that morning had been the best decision he'd ever made. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because it was right. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.